Morning. We're live.
It's go time.
It's go. Oh, that's a good one.
Just
I
not
like
really.
it. I like the old one better.
I like the enthusiasm that you used on that. It's go time.
Just thought change it up a little, you know. No, it's
You're supposed to go like that.
just
I don't know.
snap and point.
Snap and point.
It's good.
I can't snap like that was a good snap that you just
I can't either.
My dad had the loudest snap of anybody I've ever heard. And if you heard the snap, you knew just to stop and figure out if it was meant for you or somebody else. Because if it was meant for you, it was bad.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It was one of those, like when you heard the snaps, like, oh, Dad's and he's not happy about something.
Yeah.
But you could hear it anywhere you were, in the house you heard that. I can't do it, but
When you were in
Yeah.
school, did you used to do the stupid finger snap?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
no.
Because you used to have competitions to see who could do that the loudest. My brother was stinking loud with those.
I forgot all about that.
I couldn't do it. My brother was so loud. I thought he was cool just because he could do that.
Yeah, well,
There
I
you
can
go.
still do it.
It looks
Yeah, it doesn't
interesting.
look cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
Never did.
Yeah.
But
No, we did that. We also had loogie contest.
whoa.
No.
Here
so
goes Jack.
so we
Yeah.
did
We did
gleek.
Grove in Prineville.
We did gleek.
Yeah, like see how long you can hang in front of your mouth before
Okay,
it
no.
broke off.
No.
Like if you get one down to the ground.
don't tune out. There's more to there.
We did gleeking.
I remember
Yeah,
gleeking.
like how far you could shoot it.
So gleek is when you squirt
Yeah.
from underneath your tongue like a
Right.
little lizard or something. So we would have like noun laters. We would just sit around and get like these noun laters and juice up our mouths, and then have these gleeking contests.
I cannot gleek.
Nice.
I couldn't do it. Sometimes I do it unintentionally, like when I'm just standing there talking to somebody all of a sudden, But I could never do it on purpose.
Again, I was bad. Like everyone
Yeah.
else was better than me, but I could gleek a little bit.
Yeah.
But it would always go like sideways, like it was out of control. I'd like gleek and it'd like shoot over.
I always
here.
wanted to be able
Nice.
to do it, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
Couldn't spit through my teeth, so you could do
Yeah.
that between your front teeth. That,
Well,
where you
you
can
can
shoot it.
smack
Yeah.
your finger though, Brent.
but I can smack my finger.
That's not nothing.
I also wanted to be that. There was guys that could do the water droplet thing.
Yeah.
Well, I almost did it.
Yeah, that was pretty
That's
good.
pretty good.
Yeah.
And I could never do that, and I always wanted to. So,
Could you blow a smoke ring?
yeah.
Me too. Could you blow a ring through a ring?
Yeah, I've done that
Wow.
before too. Yeah.
That stuff's just above my pay grade.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey,
We're off to a good start today.
how about them Chiefs?
Yeah.
Did you guys watch the Super Bowl? You guys did watch
sort
the
of.
Super Bowl.
Sort of.
Okay.
It was
was-
on and we were in the room.
There was a lot of noise and chaos going on in the house, and fortunately the TV's big enough to where we just kind of stood back in the kitchen, away from everything, and you could see it and still kind of figure out what was going on.
And we
So-
grazed.
Yeah, we mostly close to the food. That was really why.
Me and
But-
my wife went for a bike ride
Wow.
because we're spiritual.
Huh.
So, no,
Good.
Neither of us care about it. So it was 50 and sunny. So we pulled our bikes out, which was pretty rad.
It was mostly all the kids were home, and we had a lot of food. And it
No,
was the
that's
last
great.
time the
That's
kids were
why
going to
you
be
do it.
together before Jordan
Yeah.
took off to Texas this morning, actually. So she's moved,
Oh, wow.
moving on her way there right now. And so,
Okay.
so it'll be a while before we all get back together again. So it was just an excuse to get together, eat some food, and hang out.
So did you guys happen to catch the advertisements, two of them, for He Gets Us?
I didn't see them on. Well, I did. They were going, but I couldn't hear them
Okay.
that
Yeah.
day. So I went back and watched a couple of them. I can't remember which ones I watched. I watched several of them on their website.
Well, I think,
There's only two during the
well,
Super Bowl, right?
there's been a bunch of them that have been airing
Yeah.
Yeah.
in different places for a long time.
Right.
But they made two specific ones for
Yeah.
the Super Bowl.
I don't know which ones were on the Super Bowl, but I
Okay.
watched several just from their
Okay.
website. So I think I probably saw what was aired.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of people up in arms, both non-believers, of course, but also believers too. So
You mean Christians are upset about something?
it's kind of funny.
Wow.
It's
Shocked.
we can find any reason to get we get mad because it's not a Jesus enough world, and then someone puts it on a on a large scale at a Super Bowl, and someone gets mad.
I did hear
Yeah.
people complain about the amount of money that
$7
was spent.
million average
Yeah.
for a Super Bowl slot for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And one of them I think was a 45-second slot.
Somebody
so-
said it was like $20 million spent on.
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
this.
So that was one of the big complaints,
What-
right?
yeah, what
It's
could they have done to-
Jesus says to go feed the poor. I wonder how much $20 million could have fed.
Yeah.
It's like stuff like that,
That's such a hard one because
it's
it's
a hard
like
one.
you've also got the opportunity to maybe pique somebody's interest about
Maybe.
Jesus and
Right.
what's that worth. So
I even heard people talking about, it's time to start taxing the church if they got that.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't even know who was behind those ads. So I don't know.
Well,
that
that's
it
the
was
other part of
a
the
church or even a group of
controversy.
churches that was behind
It's
it.
There's
been-
some connections to this organization that put those out. There's some connections to weird places. and
well,
people aren't happy
it's
about it.
largely people don't know who else funding it. It's different groups, but the one group that came out and said we're helping with this is Hobby Lobby. And so then everybody tried to jump on
Gotcha.
and say, "Oh, these are hate groups that are
Right.
involved in this because Hobby Lobby, blah blah blah." And that was the, it's always, no matter what you do, somebody's going to be upset in this day and
Right.
age, and there's not much you can do about it. But I actually thought, for what it's worth, they were well done. It seemed like, it wasn't a lot of times when Christians put thing out, it's a little bit on the cheesy side or a
Right.
little bit on the, I wish they wouldn't have done that side. And
I think the subtlety of it's nice.
yeah,
I think anytime we talk too much, we make fools out of ourselves.
yeah.
And I don't. Anyway, it was very minimalistic, but done well. So there was kind of a little bit of a power punch with very little being said. Right? Yeah. And so it was kind of tasteful that way. But there were people that complained about, okay, why, like, make the gospel clear if you're going to do something like that, and instead of just make Jesus a rad guy.
It wasn't my favorite commercial that I saw.
Okay.
But
What
it was
was your
good.
favorite commercial that you saw? Was
I
it a
have an
beer
idea.
commercial?
It was Breaking Bad.
Yeah,
The
that's what I was gonna say.
popcorners one.
Aren't you a Christian?
Yes.
Then it's like the Jesus one.
I like that one. It was good. But if I'm being honest, seeing
I didn't see it.
you got to watch it
I gotta-
at some
I gotta
point.
see
Yeah,
it.
seeing Walter White, Jesse, and Tuco reunite was
Yeah.
was.
Are you
pretty-
serious?
Yeah,
Yeah, I got to see it.
Yeah,
Got to
pretty
watch
good.
it.
Yep.
Tuco.
Yeah, they're making popcorners, the blue bag popcorners, and they're tight.
Yeah.
You'll have to see it.
I can't
Yeah.
believe they brought Tuco
They
in
did.
for that.
They did.
They did.
You'll
Well, that
like
makes
it.
me happy.
Yeah. Well, there
And,
you
and
go.
I also saw there's a new Indiana Jones movie coming out, and
Yeah.
they,
Is he
they
in,
need to redeem the last one. So hopefully this one is going to be good.
Chad, they can't redeem the last one. Is he in a walker?
He's in a
Or-
walker. Yeah. he's got an electric
He's got
wheelchair,
oxygen strapped to his back.
Maybe so.
outrunning a boulder in an electric wheelchair. It's gonna be epic.
Right. That's awesome.
I hate snakes. Yeah. Cool. What are we doing? Who's doing
Yeah.
this? What's
Uh,
going on?
We're talking about church strategery.
That's a George W. Bush Jr.
You said that like we were in a spelling bee. The word is strategery.
Well, I know there's. I don't know if W actually said strategery
W?
or if it was a Saturday Night Live, because I know they made fun of him.
I think he might have
for
said it.
I
But he might have said it.
I think he said several words along those lines,
He might have.
which is what made him so rad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So strategery.
What
So-
do we mean by that?
I was going to ask you. I'm the one asking
Okay.
the questions
Oh,
today.
well,
What
fair
do we
enough.
mean by strategery, Brent?
I'm asking the questions here.
Well, this kind of plays off of some of what we talked about last week, as far as how we try to win people or get people piqued or excited about coming to your church, and so different models or strategies are implemented to try to kind of woo people in or attract people or that type of thing, and so that's all I got
Yeah.
on that.
Well, I made a list of some of the common strategeries out there for churches, and this isn't necessarily an exhaustive list, and maybe you guys have some things to add to it, but I just was starting to think. So probably the most common thing that people might be familiar with is a seeker-friendly church. What do they mean by that when a church calls themselves seeker-friendly?
That to me would be the attractional model. And so basically the idea is that you are trying to think about how we can bring people in from, that maybe wouldn't normally come to church by providing a really cool experience, really cool music, really cool programs, almost, what would attract a non-believer into our church. And so that's the idea of the seeker sensitive, which is not in and of itself a bad thing. But the way that it kind of plays itself out becomes a problem, which
Sure.
we'll probably get into. So.
Sure. Well, I thought as we go through this, maybe we could talk about some of the pros and cons of kind of these different models. So what would you say are some of the pros of maybe being a seeker-friendly church?
Well, hopefully, if you're preaching the gospel, they're going to hear it every time they walk in. Someone's going to hear the gospel every time they walk in. That's never a loss. That's always a pro.
Sure.
So having an open door policy where people feel welcome into hearing the gospel
Right.
is kind of important.
But maybe a con of that model is that doesn't always happen.
If
Like that's kind of where
That
the
is
compromise can.
the
take place.
caveat is that it's a gospel proclaiming church, every week.
Right.
Yes, and a lot of churches aren't. So I'm going to go ahead and assume this is good if it's a gospel-centered
Right.
church.
Well, and I would say the problem absolutely is that that's not what happens, because the minute you start to talk about sin, no, I'm saying
don't come against me.
I'm not coming against you. I'm coming against the attractional model. When you talk about sin, or when you talk about the hard things that are in Scripture, or something that might offend, or you risk the possibility of turning one of those people away. And if the whole goal is to just fill the church with as many non-believers as you can't talk about that kind of stuff. You can't say anything that would offend, and that's the problem with that model.
Yeah, if you're not a gospel-centered church, there's like numerous problems.
Right.
One of
And
them
that's
is
why
that.
you
The
get-
other one is even just if you're non-gospel, then you're probably moralistic even. If you're not soft or liberal
Yep.
with the Word of God and what you're talking about, you're going to be moralistic. So you're going to be teaching people a false gospel, like something that can't save them, right?
Sure.
Which is what a lot of churches are doing too. So
Well, the focus can become in those kinds of churches, 5 ways to be a better dad or a husband.
That's
or,
exactly-
whatever.
yeah.
The primary focus can be more what you do for Christ rather than what He's done for you.
or just go be a good person.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where you see a lot of the churches that do topical series. They're not getting into all the Word of God. They're picking and choosing what they talk about, and it's very practical. It's meeting a felt need. People walk out feeling like they've heard a good moralistic kind of a do good sermon about kind of almost motivational speaker. This fills churches.
Sure.
And it's also extremely consumer driven. You're always thinking about what's going to be, and we talked about this last week. That's part of the reason that we struggle with, what do we do to win people? What do we do to get people to come in?
Right.
You can become so consumer minded that you really lose sight of why we're really at church and who it's for and what it's really about. And that's, I think, one of the other downsides. But the positive sides is they tend to be more casual, more welcoming, more accessible to people.
Sure.
There's a lot of things I think about that model that we actually employ, but not, part and parcel of the whole thing. So,
Right.
yeah.
What about liturgical? What's a liturgical church?
Did you
Big
say,
word.
Did you say turd?
I did not say turd.
That's not in there. Turd.
You gave me a hard time for about Louise a minute ago, and you just threw out a turd?
Liturgical.
Dude.
So
Go ahead,
if
Brent.
there's an attractional model, I would say there's a doxological model.
Ooh.
And this is what
I
that
knew
would,
he was waiting to get
I
that
know,
word
yeah,
out.
It's a good word.
That's
isn't
good.
it? So I would say that's more what this is. And it's almost you've seen this almost swing of seeker friendly, almost had it had its run, and then people kind of got tired of it, and then they swung back over further to the other direction, which I think is more the liturgical idea, which is more high church. It's really about the worship of God, and it's not man-centered, it's God-centered, and that's a good thing. It gets kind of that part more correct, I would say, and but it runs the risk of being cold, loveless,
Well, and locked down even.
locked down.
So sometimes
insular.
you're not even in a position. You're not positioned in your mind or in whatever it is you're doing, the liturgy, for who might come in and what those needs might be. And I'm not saying like you would cast off what the church does because of that, but there is a sensitivity, I think, if you have open doors, like to who's coming in and what's going on. And how you do things. So, and it's not quite the same thing, but like Paul, talks a little bit about that to the Corinthian church. Like they were locked into doing certain things. They elevated, and they weren't super helpful, but they were so locked into it that they weren't paying any attention to the fact that it wasn't helpful. and so I think a liturgical church can be so locked down that they're just not as sensitive as they could be to what God might be doing outside of their little rituals.
What kind of things, like what would you see in a liturgical church service? What would that look like?
I mean, I think, some of like the doxology is sung at many liturgical churches every week. Candles. You might see
robes.
You might see.
Vestiges.
We actually do an invocation when we start the service, and what's it called when we end the service?
Convocation.
Convocation. We don't call it that, but the same kind of thing where there's kind of these.
Sometimes there's call and response type things. Like everything has its little place.
Yeah.
There's a schedule, right?
Yeah, schedule.
That you go through and you move through of all these different things that the church does.
Yeah.
And
maybe even somebody like reading a prescribed prayer rather than like an
Responsive reading.
extemporaneous
For
prayer.
sure.
Yeah, it feels more probably religious, traditional.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by lockdown.
Ritualistic and not in a. I mean, I think those can be bad things, but they can also be good things.
Oh, for
So,
sure, for sure. But it seems to be system led.
Yeah.
Like everything's, relying on clicking along within its
Sure.
I would say
its
even
little time frame.
even maybe the sacraments, communion and baptism might hold a higher, church membership might hold a higher view in some of those churches than in a seeker sensitive church. Kind of feels more rule driven or more.
Yeah.
Feels more like a funeral. It feels like Christians are miserable people that aren't allowed to smile or anything.
I remember a few years back, I was in a cohort with some other pastors, and we were just talking about our church services and what they look like. And the guys in the cohort, I wouldn't necessarily call them like straight up liturgical, but I would say more liturgical than us.
Yeah.
And, when I shared about, that we have a time during our service where we just open the mic and hand it out, these guys were like, "You do what?" I can't believe you do that.
Inconceivable.
Yeah.
That would not fly
exactly
in a highly liturgical church.
Yeah.
So that's right out.
Yeah, that's the opposite of what a liturgical church would do. Yes.
Yeah.
What about traditional church? What do we mean? Like, there's in my mind, there's a distinction between liturgical and traditional, and I guess I'm thinking traditional that somebody's target audience is maybe the older crowd.
Oh.
So traditional, like maybe there's a value of like we only sing hymns and older songs and no drum sets right out, can't do that.
Yeah.
Things like that.
So you're stuck in the past. You're obviously not paying attention at all to what the culture's doing or what God's doing in the culture. Like you're not paying attention at all to how the world is changing around you.
Right.
And that's even for the church, for inside the church. And so you're just stuck in what you've always liked as opposed to what might be better or more effective.
Right.
Yeah.
I would think this kind of maybe falls into the attractional category because I what you see some churches doing is they'll have a service that's a traditional service and then a service that's a contemporary service, and so they're kind of trying to be all things to all people in a sense of like, okay, these guys want this, so we'll give them what they want, and these guys want this, so we'll give them what they want, and you end up with two different churches really. And you've separated maybe the older crowd from the younger crowd.
So I have on my list contemporary, and then I also have blended, which that's what I mean by blended is where people are kind of going for both, and so maybe we can just lump those all together: traditional, contemporary, and blended.
I don't know if churches are still really doing this, but I know in the 90s and the 2000 maybe early 2000s there was still a lot of the you could pick which service you wanted.
Right.
Oh really?
Oh yeah, you could go to the traditional
No.
service.
I mean that far back? I thought it was a newer thing.
Oh,
there's definitely churches
still doing that.
This.
Really?
I know of one local.
I know a couple local
that's been doing that for probably since the 90s.
I think it's a bad idea, so I want it to go away.
It's a bad idea for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you would call it seeker sensitive necessarily. Maybe in a way. But it's definitely
seeker sensitive to a specific group.
It's definitely appeasing, right? Maybe like appeasing the consumerism that's within your people.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily something that non-believer would care about. You know what I mean? Like come to my church because we got this flavor and this flavor. But it's the people that are already in your church, right? That have a desire for something, and you give it to them, even though it's damaging to the congregation.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't have the church's best in mind.
Yeah, it's like an appeasing.
It has the
strategy.
individual's best in mind, and that's where we. Again, that's always the struggle we wrestle with.
Write that down.
What's best for the church?
Yeah. Appeasing. No, I'm just kidding. We created another one.
Yeah.
Appeasing
Brent.
one's doxological leaning. That's this phrase.
No, I think that's a question that we ever wrestle. What's best for the church as opposed to what's best for the individual? And I think there's part of us that always wants to try to accommodate everybody's individual felt needs and wants. And
we want to keep
stuff.
Yeah.
So if someone has a complaint, then you probably ought to take care of that complaint. You know what I mean?
But what's best for the church is that all age groups are together.
Yep.
And that maybe this is what the blended service would be is you've got songs that maybe an older person would love and maybe a younger person would love, and maybe it's good to have both of those things, But what does God want, and what's going to be most pleasing to God is the question that probably should be asked.
Right. Well, and I'll back up here in a second because I forgot to ask you this on the liturgical thing, but for traditional, contemporary, blended, like what are some of the pros and cons about those particular models or ideologies?
Pros?
On all three of those?
Yeah.
Oh, like individually?
Or as a group, I don't care.
The con is it kills integrate. We already talked about it.
Well, for blended, I think there's a pro in that that's.
Oh wait, is that a deal?
Well, he said liturgical.
Oh, I thought you
Well,
meant. I thought you meant the churches that have
contemporary and blended
separate services.
Well,
Sorry.
so there are some churches that would do maybe a traditional service and a contemporary service separately, but then there are other churches that maybe try to mix those kind of into one.
Okay, gotcha.
elements, right? And so maybe there's some more pros to a blended service where they try
sure.
to kind of span the age groups.
Well, wouldn't
but
we be a blended service?
I think we would.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we try
Yeah.
to do that. So yeah, I think that is I think with the contemporary, I guess, or the traditional, the heart of it is try to get people that have something in common together, and maybe want to be together.
Yeah.
And I think there are places and times for that in the church, but on Sunday mornings that doesn't make sense to me at all.
Right.
So anyway.
What about backing up for a second on for the liturgical? What are some of the pros and cons about that? We didn't really kind of skipped over that part.
I think we did talk.
Oh,
didn't
I
we?
thought we did.
I thought we
Yeah,
did.
very high view of worship and God is kind of the focal point. But I think
Well, could be.
should
Could
be.
not be too.
Yeah.
Well, as opposed to like where you've got what can we do to appease men and win men, and they almost go to the other extreme of like all they're thinking about maybe is they're not necessarily thinking about who's coming in or
Sure.
they're just but the strength would be that it's more, I would say, worship centric than man centric, which is always a good thing. But I think recently
Well, there's a reverence to it, right? Like,
yeah
there can be. I think is maybe the biggest benefit. Like,
Correct.
Sometimes that's even. I love this. Gosh, this is a whole nother subject. I love the way we do things. How they're very accessible and approachable to anybody. Like I love it, and I think there's good biblical reasons for that. But sometimes you will miss the component of like maybe a reverence to
Right.
what we're doing as we assemble together as the church before God. And I think they definitely hit it for a pro. The more liturgical ones you tend to sit there being like, okay, we're participating in something like important right now.
Right.
But then you run the risk, though, and that's maybe the con
No doubt.
of alienating
Right, it's not as
anybody that
accessible.
comes in from outside. So if an unbeliever walks in, it's going to be this foreign culture that they can't.
Well, they're going to be
they
like,
don't have
what
an
does this
access
mean
point,
to me?
Right.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And then a lot of that stuff can become very commonplace too, right? So like the more you do the vain repetitions and the religiosity, going through the motions, a lot of times it loses its value to where if that's not there and it's more of a loose service, again, you're kind of moving and adjusting and things look a little different every time you do it, and sometimes
Right.
it can make it more meaningful. So I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's good.
I would say the extremes to kind of consider is if you only have the outsider in mind, you've got a problem, and that's
Sure.
kind of the seeker
No
model.
doubt.
And if you've only got the insider in mind, that's a problem too.
Sure.
And trying to strike a balance to where you're doing a little bit of both. At least being aware of the fact that what if a non-believer comes in? What are they going to experience? What are they going to see? How are they going to feel?
Right.
And then also not just cater it to them and forget about the Christians that are in the room too. They're important.
Well, the reason like Paul tells the Corinthians not to speak in tongues is because they're going to come in and they're going to hear something and see something that doesn't benefit them. Like they're not going to understand what's going on. And I think we can do that sometimes in our liturgical,
Sure.
I don't know, just things that we go through,
Right.
If it's just something that we do constantly for the church, like the church may understand it, but it may be one of those things that an outsider comes in and doesn't understand what they're seeing and hearing.
Right.
It,
And at the end of the
makes
day, we
no
don't have
sense.
a barrier for the gospel.
And I know
Put
Paul
in
was
front of
talking about
somebody.
tongues, but I think you can maybe draw like some parallels to other ways that we're like cutting off an opportunity.
Right.
Right.
So I'll jump ahead. I'll come back to the list in a minute. One of the questions I had later on down is who should the church service cater to? And so we've already kind of started talking about that. Is it something where we need to think 50-50, insider and outsider, believer, non-believer? Or, should the church service kind of cater maybe more one way than the other?
Cater to the church. The church is believers.
Right.
So
Well-
the church gathers for believers. However,
Yeah.
the believers are here on earth to
For a
help
reason.
build the church.
Right.
Right? It's not like the church is built, like let's stop. We're here to constantly build the church. We're called out to call out. And so we should be mindful of that in every aspect of our lives as believers and as the church, which again is why Paul even has a word to the church in Corinth, like outsiders are going to come in, like you should want this and expect this and be mindful of this. But the gathering is for the church.
But here's the issue I agree with that, but the issue is that it's for the invisible church. And when we gather on Sunday mornings, there are believers in our midst, and there are unbelievers in our midst. And that is unfortunately true of every church. And they may not know the difference. The people that are sitting there, we don't always know. And so, are we there for the believer? Absolutely. But we always have to be aware that there are unbelievers in our midst.
Agreed.
Even if, you don't know how to identify them per se. I mean, if it's a new person walking in and they say, "Hey, I'm an unbeliever," that's pretty straightforward.
Right.
But how are we talking? What are the words we're using? Do they understand what we're doing when we have communion? There's things like that we probably should just be mindful of.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes we get into that mode where these are all Christians, and we don't have to worry about thinking about, somebody who might not be.
Right. Yeah. So maybe using the word or the phrase "cater to" isn't a good phrase. Maybe it's more about accessibility, something that's meaningful to the believer and something that's accessible for the unbeliever, that they can at least have some kind of understanding or sense of what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that even came up in the music recently where we were talking to somebody that, some of the hymn language, people don't, even Christians sometimes don't even know what we're singing about, and that can be.
Raise your Ebenezer.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be kind of weird. So trying to do a good job of making sure people understand what's going on is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So this one of these things isn't like the others. Cowboy church. I know of a local here in Central Oregon, a local cowboy church, and they, from what I can gather, like their attendance is high, and they seem to be drawing a crowd. I know very little about them, so I'm trying not to bag on them because I don't really know much about them at all. But they've kind of decidedly said we're the cowboy church. What do you think about something like that?
There's a one in town that's a biker church too, I guess. I wouldn't necessarily. I think if you were like a parachurch organization that has a ministry towards cowboys or towards bikers, I think is kind of a cool idea. But a Sunday service where you have to be a cowboy or you can't come, or a biker, you can't come. I don't know. And I don't think that's what they would say, but it kind of feels that way.
But if you're not that, it would be awkward to walk into something like that.
Yeah.
Possibly. Yeah, there's another reason to feel like an outsider automatically, right? Like if you're like, there's another way that you might be an outsider.
Yeah.
And we don't need that obstacle. We don't need another obstacle. Like we need a place that we can all access because we're sinners. And yet, like God does do different things in different ways, in different places at different times. And so like, I know the church you're talking about. I know a couple of the people that go there and personally, and it's in all fairness, it's in a ranching community, right? So the majority of like the people that live in that community where that church is happen to be ranchers. In fact, I think this is one of the reasons it kind of started. I don't think someone went, "Oh, I'm going to start a cowboy church," but a lot of these guys were working heavy on Sundays because of the nature of their business and when things get done and cattle gets moved and all this stuff, where Mondays are normally the ranchers' day off. And so a lot of it was just to meet on Mondays, which allowed these people with their line of work and their lifestyle to be able to actually go to church and worship on Monday because they couldn't do it on Sunday. So it brought
some accessibility.
Yeah, and now, I mean, one of their ministries is that they collectively take their beef and pool it together and distribute it to poor people in the community because it's one of those things that God is. And so like
we do that too. Every time I have a beef, I make sure everybody knows about it. That's not what you're talking about?
Yes, Brent.
I saw I can't remember what the number was, but I saw the other day how like the amount of beef that they distributed in 2022, and I can't remember what it was, but it was a high.
Isn't it? It's not just a local thing. It's a denomination that's all over aren't there cowboy churches everywhere?
Well, this particular one I think belongs to a well-known denomination that isn't necessarily.
I thought this was like a world, a United
I don't think
States
it's a
strategy.
So this is where I would maybe draw the line. The difference is in why you're doing it. So if someone said, "I'm going to go start a church and make it a cowboy church because I like cowboys and I want to surround myself with Christian cowboys," I think that's dumb. That's just dumb. It's unjustified. But I think if someone's saying, "There's a church that we're planning in this community," and this is what the needs of this community are for the believers and the non-believers, that's fair game.
Sure.
Yeah, that's smart.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so whether it's bikers or whatever, you can take that across other lines. I think it depends on the motive, like why you're building it that way.
I would guess their argument would be that we're creating a church that most most people, a cowboy type person, would never, walk into a normal church, and we provide an access point for them to come to Christ.
Yeah, maybe they're trying to be missional.
So they're
too.
not looking at. I think it's a missional opportunity, hopefully. And
Right.
so
I wouldn't walk in there.
Well, I don't think they would want you to.
I don't think they would want me to.
The whole church would just stop and look at you,
Yeah,
and then wait for you to leave.
that's awesome.
Yes, they would.
I'd wear my Crocs in there, and they'd be
You'd be
Put
right
some
out.
spurs on
run
your
me out
rocks.
on a rail.
They might
Wear
church
some
discipline
chaps.
you right there on the spot. What about, we've already talked a little bit about multi-service, but kind of setting aside, the style, just the idea of a church having, multiple services, as a strategy. I'm sure we've got some thoughts about that.
Well, if your intention is to build multiple churches, then yeah, have fun.
Multiple
But if you're
churches in the same place?
Yep, that's exactly what it's doing. So yeah, again, like just
Right.
I think it's. I mean, I don't think it's a strategy as much as a practical thing that arises where, we filled the sanctuary, and so we can either try to build a bigger sanctuary, or we can go to 2 services, or we could try to plant, ourselves someplace else and distribute. Get wider and not just taller, but. Yeah, in general,
but that's the strategy, right?
Right.
If
Yeah.
it's
It's
in
an
one
overarching
location,
strategy.
the strategy is to get big.
yeah, keep growing up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but it
Build a
effectively creates a second church, even if you don't intend it to be.
Totally
Right.
does.
And generally, you end up with this bigger machine to feed. You have to have childcare for both services. You have to have worship for both
Yeah.
services.
Volunteers. For
And
both
so
services,
you're
yeah.
running
Yeah.
your volunteers ragged. And again, we've worked hard to never go to 2 services for that very reason. So
Right. And I think if we were ever faced with, having to decide to go up or out, I think for us it's a pretty easy decision.
we've done that twice now, where the strategy was we're kind of filling up, and so let's try
Move out.
to move out, and one of them worked and one of them didn't. So guess which one worked, Chad?
I think of a pastor that we know years ago, in talking with him, their strategy up in Portland was, every time we grow to 300 people, we're going to send 100 people out to a different part of Portland. And I just loved that strategy so much. And in talking with this guy, the question was, what do you think would be more effective, one church of 2,000 or 10 churches of 200,
No
kind of
doubt.
more strategically placed,
Easily.
throughout the metro area.
Easily.
And I just loved that way of thinking.
It depends on what your goal is, because again, if your goal is smaller is by far easier to manage. There's more intimacy, there's more accountability, there's all those things. But the bottom line is a lot of people don't want anything to do with that.
Right.
So the large church is exactly what they want, because they can slip in and out, get a great show, get the great bennies, great kids programs, all that kind of stuff.
But from the inside out, from the church looking out, the 200 is way better. If you're a missional church,
Right.
if that's what the goal of the church is, if that's the DNA, everyone's bought into it.
Right.
It's not even a contest.
Yeah.
And
Which
that's
one's
a
more
good
effective.
segue. So the last one on my list is the missional model. And what do we mean when we say that a church is missional?
I think it's just having our priorities right as far as why the church exists. If you can answer that question, then I think you can't not be a missional church.
Right.
Right. Like, why are we here? We're not here. The church isn't here to just sing songs together and on Sundays and stuff like that. We do those things, but we're here to again build the church. We're going all the way back to where we started. The church is here
Right.
to build the church. We're on mission with God in building this thing that we have now become a part of, so that other people can now become a part of it. So, and if you know that, if that's your purpose, then you're a missional church.
Yeah.
I would say it's kind of tricky, because I think the attractional model, seeker sensitive, would say they're being missional because they're trying to get non-believers to come into their church.
sure.
The problem is that we're at a point now where we're not attractive anymore, I guess is how I would say it, to most people. There was a time in America where the Christian church was probably fairly attractive. And so you could attract people,
Yeah.
and now that's kind of going away. And so the idea that we're going to be able to attract people in by, because we got a good band or whatever it is, that's probably not a realistic idea anymore. So now that idea of mission probably isn't going to work. So how do we pivot and, adjust? And so the idea now that we would gather and then scatter, you can still invite people to church. I mean, that's still fair game, but it's really the idea that, like we end up most of our services, you're about to enter the mission field now. Keep in mind that, that this is where you're headed. And, next is anyway.
I think maybe a distinction between seeker friendly and missional would be, at least in my mind, seeker friendly would be more kind of driven by consumerism and people's felt needs,
Right.
and those kinds of things.
Within the church,
Yeah,
within
yeah.
the walls.
And maybe even with noble motives of wanting to grow the church and draw people into it. But I think when we talk about a missional church, it would be more like the gospel is the thing that attracts people, with the understanding like it's probably not going to draw the masses, or the crowds, but this is God's prescription for the church. And so as a missional church, we're going to stick to God's prescription.
So Jared Wilson wrote a book called The Gospel Driven Church, and that aspect of a missional church I would get behind 100%. But I think every church thinks they're missional.
Right.
And even, the seeker-friendly church would say they have a mission.
Yeah.
Problem is probably not a lot of people are getting saved. In fact, the stats pointed to that. When they actually evaluated the history of the seeker-sensitive movement, they found that not a lot of people were actually coming to Christ and being saved. So, but a gospel-driven church, which is, I hope, what we are. Hopefully you're seeing people hear the gospel every week and get saved.
But we're doing things that people could say, oh, you're doing the attractional thing, like by the color paint that we put on the walls, or how we decorate or don't decorate. We see those as not, if people do walk in, not putting some unnecessary, silly obstacle in front of them, that causes them to not come back or to not hear the gospel while they're here. So it's almost the opposite of what other churches are doing. We're actually trying to strip everything down. We're actually trying to clean house and minimalize everything, but we are doing it for the non-believer coming in so that there's no obstacle. But once they get in, it is all Christ-centered, right? But the missional church, the missional church is going to be outward as well. So it's simply going to be Christ-centered in everything we do inside the church and when we leave the church building.
Well, hopefully, like you just said, we take aspects of each one of these things and figure out what's the best part of this that we can implement, what's the best part of that we can implement, and try to come up with something. And the cool thing is we do see people in our congregations that are kind of from each of these walks of life. We see people that are really, maybe more liturgical. We see more that are used to like a Calvary Chapel kind of thing, and somehow we've all come together, and
we are,
and because Christ is the focus and not necessarily all these other things, kind of works.
We are a junk drawer of believers, and even the people that come in and stay are kind of a junk drawer of just where they come from. So.
I mean that in the best possible way.
Yeah.
It's not a junk.
Drawer
it's a
people.
compliment.
Yeah. It's true.
Are there cons to being a missional church?
I sure hope not.
It's funny because people define it differently, and so it could be the idea of gather and scatter could mean that you're locked down, you're insular, you're not, Sunday mornings are only for believers, and then I don't know if that's a con or not, because I don't think that's what we're doing, but I guess that could be considered a knock on the missional church.
Sure. I guess at the end of the day, and we've just said this a minute ago, one of you guys said it, like every church has a mission and every church is missional. I guess kind of the big question is, what's the mission? Right. And so if our mission is, Christ-centered, gospel-centered, then I can't think of any cons.
No, I can't either.
Yeah, if our point is to win people to Christ, which is my definition of missional,
right?
Then, where's the con? Yeah. I don't know. That's what every church should be, wanting, desiring to win people to Christ.
Right.
Well, and then understanding that what worked 20 years ago may not work today. And so kind of always.
Well, that's just it. It takes care of itself. If you're constantly wanting to win people to Christ, that will automatically follow the other. You will pay attention to strategies, strategeries,
right?
And what's effective we're doing, not whatever. You know what I mean. I'm going to stop
Before
I get myself in trouble.
That's why we were talking last week about different ways to maybe attract millennials and Gen Zers, and some of the ideas that I was hearing was, what if we had a sewing class or a baking class or an oil changing class or something like that? And that class is maybe the wrong term, but a day where we invited people from the public to come and learn something like this, to where you're actually trying to find a way to engage community, engage culture in a way that is practical for them, with the end goal of hoping that they'll come hear about Christ and be saved. Those are kind of neat inroads.
Yeah.
How can we kind of work our way into the community in a practical, loving way that's not harsh or judgmental, or maybe
that's the key is getting your people to buy in. A missional church isn't going to be 2 or 3 people that are absolutely convicted to be missional.
Yeah.
It's going to be when a local church buys in,
That's a great point.
and most people are leaving and then doing those things that will create mission. So you can create things at the church and bring people in, which is fine, but going out's always radder. I mean, going to where they are on their terms and on their turf is there's something about that's maybe even more effective.
Absolutely.
So like we're talking about the bowling alley finally got bought again down in La Pine.
By a pro.
We're gonna so once they reestablish that and get their feet under them, we're gonna do that again, where we have a night,
Have a bowling night.
for the La Pine crew down there, and say, hey, we're gonna show up at the bowling alley at 6:00 on Tuesday nights. You know, we did that for a while, and it was rad. And you're just going to their territory and their turf, and you're meeting people and shaking hands and taking names and learning. You know, dude, bro.
Just you didn't say kicking.
You're kicking butt and taking hands, you know? For Jesus.
Yeah, that's all I could think of. Sorry, just it's right there.
But it's a buy-in thing.
It is. And I think about, years ago, like when I first moved down to La Pine, there's an RV park right across the street from the building, and not a vacation RV park, but, broken down RVs, people live there, and RVs that need to be towed and that kind of a thing. And so, there seemed to be a heart among the people to reach out to our neighbors across the street. And so we attempted, I think 3 or 4 different times, a barbecue in our parking lot. We just fire up the grill and invite the neighbors over, and almost nobody came. And one day we thought, what if we wheeled the barbecue across the street? I mean, it's only, 50 feet.
Right.
But the day that we wheeled the barbecue across the street, all of a sudden people are coming out of their trailers and like, what are you guys doing over here? And, we were able to engage with people. Just that simple act of walking across the street.
They weren't coming out with shotguns?
No.
Okay.
I mean, there were some leery looks, and people were, kind of skeptical of what was going on, but they came out, right? They didn't come across the street. We went across the street, and that made all the difference in the world of, us kind of going on.
That's the difference between attractional and missional.
Yep.
That's a great example. Even what we're doing right now with the school, where you've got the Hoffs and some other families now are jumping in to go across the street to express some kind of just genuine kindness and love on behalf of, with Christ is kind of like the impetus, and they know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. A couple questions, kind of in light of all of this. Why isn't there just one style of church that everybody agrees upon?
Because the rest.
What were you saying, Brent?
I was going to be a smart aleck and say because everybody else is stupid and wrong. Just kidding. I'm kidding. I don't know. Everybody's individual and different, and it's just kind of a hard thing. What one person desires and relates to. We even see that here. People come to the door and it's just not the church for them, and then they'll go down the street and find another gospel center church and they love it. So I really don't understand how it all works exactly, but
I think one reason is what we're doing today is everybody will have a different emphasis when they read this and they look at the church. They'll have a different emphasis of what the church should be about. And I think that right there, like the reality of that, has given us a ton of flavors of church, a ton of different kinds of churches. It's because we kind of look at and then hold up as the highest thing different things. We don't all hold the same thing, in first place,
right?
Which should be missional. but and then the other part, in my opinion, is that we're all wired different. You kind of alluded to this, like we all have different giftings and just different passions, you know what I mean? Like different focuses and affinities. And so when you get a leader in that's that way, there's that's
right.
going to, I don't know, it's going to color everything, that comes out of that local work. You know what I mean? So
would it be a benefit if maybe you had more than one pastor at a church?
I wouldn't go that far.
So that it
just
wasn't
talking extreme here.
I would go that far.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, you're right. That does flavor the whole.
The heck you say?
Yeah. It's funny because you'll have some churches that are really excited about maybe the gifts and serving and social things, and you'll have one that's got a really high view of God's word, and that's doctrine and soundness is really important. And if you can find a way to merge these things so that you get the best of all of it, that's what's wonderful. And I hope that's what we've kind of have strived to do.
Well,
over
again,
the
I
years.
think that's why we're a junk drawer. Like that's I think a testament to like that it is working.
Yeah.
Because we do have charismatics, and then we do have people that are maybe more liturgical where they came from. We kind of have everything that's coming together, and we're okay together. And people even like that we're together with people that aren't
Right.
like us.
But
So-
it's because we've made the main thing Christ
Right.
and not
Agreed.
these other things.
Agreed.
It's-
But I do
I
think
hope.
that's part of the reason why we have so many churches is because there's so many expressions out there, and it's human nature to lump with our kind.
Right,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? So an elbow, someone that God's made an elbow is like, where's the rest of the elbows? You know what I mean? That's where I'm supposed to be. So we can like all the body parts are like, you know what I mean? Anyway, we're not very diverse locally because of that.
Well, I think it's a false dichotomy to say that you've got to kind of pick one or the other. Pick this style or that style, and it's a dichotomy that doesn't need to exist.
Right.
I think as we've talked about pros and cons of all of these, I think that lends itself to saying like there's, you can blend styles, if you will, for lack of a better thing to call it, and a church doesn't have to like pigeonhole themselves into, a biker church or a cowboy church or a seeker-sensitive church or whatever it is.
Right.
What about over time? Should the style of a church or its strategery should it change over time?
Strategery. Depends on what we're talking about here, Chad.
Well, unpack that.
We're talking about putting big decals up on walls, or what are we talking? What are we talking
We
about?
did talk about that earlier before the podcast.
I don't know. Brent, speak to this one.
I think we just always have to be mindful of what our culture is like, and what the church is like, and so there was a time when the church was absolutely in the center of our culture, and so we kind of operated with that understanding, and now we're no longer there. Now we're out in the margins, whether we realize it or not. So we have to think differently. We have to, it changes our strategy. It changes the way we think about kind of everything. And I think it's going to continue to be more and more of that. So if we're truly missionaries, we're walking into a foreign culture and we're looking around at this culture and we're finding out how can we make inroads here. What's the best strategy that we can use? And so you always have to think about that. You can't just be locked into this is what we've always done it.
Right.
It's what we're always going to do it. It's worked, if it
Right.
worked back then,
That's
it'll
where
work
the traditional
today.
church comes from.
Correct.
Is develops over time.
And that's a church that will probably become irrelevant and die.
Right.
Not because the gospel's irrelevant, but because
Right.
they just,
There was a time when fake plants were acceptable on stages. You know what I'm saying? As an example. So
That's a great example.
So yeah, we need to have our eyes open and just pay attention to what's going on around us.
well, that's I mean,
Bulletins have become like that too, right? Like that's part of technology. But you still see churches even today holding on to the bulletin thing.
Right.
And by golly, don't you ever even think about getting rid of that bulletin?
It's
You know
one
what
of
I
my
mean?
favorite things that we don't do a bulletin.
And we don't need to do it because there's so many other ways to do the same, to communicate what you need to say.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of that's just and a lot of people will walk in and look at that and be like it's like a stepping into a time machine.
Yeah.
It's like, what am I in this 80s right now? Like, what are we doing? So I don't know.
So here's a bonus question that wasn't on my list that I just kind of thought of as you were talking, and you guys can speak to this because you've been part of the door since the beginning and I haven't. What are some of the ways that the door has changed its strategery kind of from day one compared to now?
Oh gosh.
Or are there?
You
has
should
it
have asked
changed?
me this one yesterday, so I could have thought about it a little bit.
I think, I don't know. I'm sure there's people have said the door's changed, and we know that. There's, a church is a living organism. It's always going to change. People come in and people leave, and so a lot's changed. As far as our strategy goes, though, I don't feel like it's changed a lot. I mean, I feel like the mission that we started with and the idea that we started with. There's some things that I think we had ideals and things that we thought were going to be a certain way, and we budged and changed a little bit here and there.
We've grown up a lot.
We have grown up a lot, but I don't think our strategy as far as being Christ-centered has really changed. I hope it never does.
Right.
Yeah.
Because really, at the end of the day, and this is one of the things that came out in Jared Wilson's book, Christ is the most attractive thing we have going for us, and that will always be the most attractive thing we have going for us. Is if we can put Christ on display.
Yeah.
That's either going to win somebody or it's not. But that's it.
Yeah.
And we did start that way, and
Yeah.
we do continue to this day that way. Where
Yeah.
Christ is everything we have.
Yeah.
Like, we just shut off the lights if he ceases to be everything. But there's like little dynamics that I think people mistake as like, oh, this is different. I totally agree with Brent. Like the heart of the door, like this still feels the feeling when you come in here and you experience a worship service and you experience the people in here and just for lack of a better term, the vibe that goes on here is the same as it was on
Right.
day one. Like it's legit. Like and it's the reality of Christ. But a lot of people look at the group that we started with, you know,
Right.
and it was a group of cowboys, man. Like I would say half, like within the first year, you know, first 2 years of the door, like half the congregation were non-believers probably. And most of those people probably thought they were believers. And so it was like the Wild West. And people are fond of that. I'm even fond of that sometimes. Like, gosh, those were great. But it wasn't necessarily benefiting anybody. You know what I mean? We hoped it would. We hoped that everybody was being saved and being transformed, just to find out, though, a couple years later, that most of them go out from you because they are not of you. Like they
Right.
never had something. But that's the thing that I think a lot of people that were here in the beginning that say like, oh, the door's changed. Well, yeah, it has. Like everything changes, everything evolves, everything shifts, everything grows, everything matures. But the heart of the door has not. That thing that has always been special here,
Right.
hasn't changed at all.
I think maybe, again, to make a distinction between, you know, seeker-friendly and missional, like seeker-friendly is a moving target. It's constantly changing how
Absolutely.
you appeal to people's consumerism. But missional, as we've defined it, you
Yep.
know, Christ-centered, gospel-centered, that's a fixed target.
That's fixed.
And as a result, I mean, we might change, you know, some of our methods as time goes on, but the fixed target is Christ-centered, gospel-centered, and that never changes.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's good.
yeah. Well, any closing thoughts on church strategery?
Strategery. Pastrami.
David's out.
Yep.
I woke up at 4:30, so
So
yeah.
you're
I'm
ready to eat.
Well, that's not an excuse the other weeks, you know, because I'm kind of loopy every week, but I'm extra loopy today, so I'm trying to keep my mouth shut.
No, you're doing good.
Thank you.
No final thoughts? All right. One of you fellows want to pray for us?
What do you guys think of dog church?
Dog. I
My
didn't have that
wife
on the
has
list.
talk about strategery. She's like, you want to grow a church really big in Central Oregon? Open dog church where people
Yeah.
can bring their dogs, man.
And I don't think there is one of those that I know of.
Would that be okay or not? Is that crossing a line?
I would not go.
Can
to
dogs get saved?
I would not go to the Church of Dog.
Don't all dogs go to heaven?
Can they take communion?
All I'm thinking about is the hair and the liability. I'm out.
And the barking?
Don't,
Yeah.
don't even mention fleas yet
No.
or anything.
Nope.
Okay, bad idea. Then.
Yeah. All right. That's a good one to end.
All
on.
right, Brent, go ahead.
Thanks.
Continue.
Thanks for teeing me up. Father, thank you that your church is such a beautiful thing. We love it. We thank you that we get to be a part of leading this one, Lord. We continue to ask that you would be the one who's in the lead, and that we're just kind of a few steps behind, being pliable and kind of able to pivot where you want us to. Lord, we just pray that you continue to grow both locations, continue to bring people to us that will benefit the mission, and continue to bring people to us that need to hear the words of life that would save them. And so we just ask for your blessing upon us, and thank you, Father, for your faithfulness to us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.